My name is Joanna Barnett, and this is Chapter 6. Sheriff Ben was hovering at the door watching for me. Something so out of the norm filled me with dread. He held the door open but didn't smile. It was very un-Sheriff Ben-like. Deputy Ricos? He greeted me with a nod. He looked disheveled and had been running his hands through his hair. Our sheriff always looks sharp and expects the same of his deputies. My first instinct was to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. I'd go back to Terlingua to kick ass, take names all night if he'd just put his hair back in place and not look so sad or old. He took me by the elbow. "These people are odd," he whispered. "The girl seems afraid to speak. Come with me a minute." He led me into an empty office. "What's going on in Terlingua?" "I don't know, Sheriff. I'm wondering the same thing. We've never had so much trouble there before." "Yes, sir, I know. Barney and I don't like it either." "You've got to get through to this girl. She won't talk to me. You're young and a woman. Maybe she'll talk to you." "I'll try. Just let me speak with her." "We're going to get through this," he hissed, as if I was a suspect. The sheriff offered me his chair and stood to the side of the family, his arms folded across his chest. Joe Robbins nodded at me, then stood and offered his hand. He seemed about to speak, but his wife cut him off with her own greeting. I tried to get a feel for the people seated in front of me. Julie Roberts, the mother, was like a brick wall between her daughter and the world. I couldn't blame her for protecting her child, but that wasn't going to help us. The first words out of her mouth were, "I don't want a scandal." This was a rape, not a scandal. And why would someone live in Terlingua if she cared so much about what others thought? Talking about people in this community's preferred form of entertainment. You could either live with it or move. Julie Robbins looked like she'd borne the brunt of the rape. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her brown hair hanging in her face was stringy and needed washing. She nervously picked at her hands. Mandy's father hadn't spoken, but he looked clean. His fists were tightly clenched and white from the strain of pressing against his thighs. I'd be angry too if my daughter had been raped. The mother was frantic and protective. The father stunned into silent fury by such a vile act against his daughter. Mandy was pretty, with a sweet, innocent face. Her skin was flawless. Coffee-colored hair hung listlessly to her shoulders. She wore no makeup, earrings, or clips in her hair. She stared straight ahead with eyes that looked almost vacant. I decided to start with her. "I'd like to hear what happened to Mandy, in your words." "She hasn't spoken to anyone," interrupted Julie. "She refuses to speak." "Is that true, Mandy?" She shrugged. There was bruising around her neck and a red mark like a slap on her cheek. More than anything, she looked sad, unbearably sad. While I was thinking about what next to say, Sheriff Ben addressed the family. "I asked Margarita to come because she loves Interlingua. She's young and a woman, and I thought Mandy would be more comfortable with her." "Would you speak with Deputy Ricos, Mandy?" her mother asked gently. "You know Margarita." The girl stared ahead. "Would you let a nurse at the hospital examine you?" I asked. "I bathed her," interrupted Julie. "I know that's the wrong thing to do, but she was filthy and her clothes were torn and there was stuff on her." "Do you mean semen?" She nodded and her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, that, and dust, dirt, you know. She'd been thrown to the ground and there were big bruises on her thighs. I bathed her so I could get a good look at her." The last thing in the world I'd want if I'd been raped was to have my mother bathe and look at me. And my mother is a doctor. We should never have let her attend that party, but it was chaperoned, and she was going to go home with her friend Brenda. She picked at an imaginary something off of her hand. We don't know why, but she didn't do that. Were you raped at the party, Mandy? I asked. Still nothing from her and no expression I could read. If you won't talk to me, I can't help you. She shrugged and looked at her hands. My intuition said to get her away from here, so I stood. Mandy, would you go for a drive with me? We'll get a Coke or something. You don't have to talk if you don't feel like it, but I'd like to talk to you. Incredibly, Mandy stood. The sheriff brightened. The parents looked terrified. Where are you taking her? Demanded her mother. Please trust my deputy, said Sheriff Ben, endearing himself to me. Mandy and I walked in silence to my explorer. She grabbed my hand as if she was a little girl. It made my heart hurt so much I was terrified I'd cry, since tears were always just below the surface. When I opened the door for her, she sat, but seemed reluctant to let go of me. I stood holding her hand while she stared straight ahead. Everything is going to be all right, Mandy. I set her hand on her thigh and patted it. I swear, once I'd sworn I couldn't take it back. How in the world could I make everything right for Mandy Robbins? She didn't look at me or respond, except that her brown eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. I started the Explorer and had to ask her to put on her seatbelt. She did without complaint, except she did it in the stiff, unemotional way a robot would. I pulled away from the sheriff's office, wondering what to do. I can understand that you don't want to speak about it. It might be hardest thing you ever have to do. But unless I know what happened, I can't help. Even if it was someone you love, you have to tell me. She gave me a sideways look of teenage disgust. I took a different track. Mandy, don't you remember me from the soccer team? For a few years before Kevin died, I'd been a volunteer soccer coach for the girls' team. They played after school, without the approval or support of the school board or other management. They had no uniforms or fancy equipment, but they had a lot of fun and needed something constructive to do. Mandy nodded and smiled at the dashboard. That was better than staring straight ahead like a zombie, so I persisted. Would you like something to drink? A soda? Or a milkshake? No response. I pulled into a slot at Sonic. When I came here as a teen, fries and vanilla Coke were my favorites. I'm going to order that for you unless you stop me. She didn't, so I ordered. Uncomfortable silence hung in the car like a curtain. I watched teenagers cutting up in the courtyard picnic area and thought about how fast a life can go from that kind of bliss to a landscape as bleak as the moon. I wanted Mandy to laugh and play again and trust people. Yeah, I wanted global peace too, and for the world to be loved and fed. Our order came, and after paying, I pulled onto Holland Avenue, a main thoroughfare that becomes Highway 90 as it leaves town to the east. I headed in that direction, for lack of a better plan. Mandy began nibbling at the fries. I love vanilla Coke. How did you know that? I love it too. It's so sweet it makes my teeth hurt, and that's never stopped me. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. We passed motels, restaurants, and various stores. After the Dairy Queen was the university's agricultural center, with classrooms, barns, riding stables, and a rodeo arena where Kevin had once practiced and competed. There was no way I could afford to start thinking about Kevin now. After the Ag Center, the road runs parallel to train tracks. Tops a rise, and then there are acres of green ranch land on one side and tracks and rolling hills on the other. I've always loved that piece of road. I don't know why, Mandy said, but I like trains. I do too. They seem romantic and old-fashioned. I pulled into the deserted rest area. We got out and with our sodas and sat at one of the shaded cement tables and looked at each other. I'm really, really sorry that Mr. Madison died, Mandy said suddenly. Thanks, Mandy. Mr. Madison was Kevin. I never thought of him like that. Legally, I was Margarita Madison. But although I had taken care Kevin to have and to hold, I never took his name. He was the best teacher in high school, everybody said, but I never got to have him. He was always nice to me, though. Let's talk about you, I said, because I couldn't keep talking about Mr. Madison. I can't. You can trust me, Mandy. I know that, but I can't tell, or I'll be killed. Is that what the rapist said? She gave me another disgusted look, so I changed direction. Will you tell me about your family? What about them? Are you a happy family? Do you have brothers or sisters? I have a good family. What are you getting at? Nothing. I was just wondering about them. You're thinking my mom is weird? Actually, no, I was thinking about the sheriff's assessment of the Robins and as odd, and that the father was too quiet. I know she seems weird, Andy continued, but she just wants to protect me. She can't stand for bad things to happen. My mom is like that too. Then you know. Yes, I know. What about your dad? She looked at me with eyes bright with sincerity. My dad is the greatest man you could ever know. He's quiet, I guess you noticed. But he's a lot of fun. He's especially quiet when my mom starts freaking. They sound a lot like my parents. I think if he knew who raped me, he'd kill him. I want you to tell me so I can put him away before your father gets in trouble. I know you're trying to help, but when he said he'd kill me, I believed him. Could you tell me what happened and leave out the names? Tears came then, and I had to bring a box of tissues from the vehicle. I held a hurting little girl while traffic passed, either going from Alpine to Marathon or vice versa. Some took the cutoff towards Fort Stockton. I tried not to think of the horror of her ordeal, but it was all I could think about. Eventually, the crying subsided. Mandy, was it boys from school who raped you? She nodded in the affirmative. You know them? Yes. She shuddered from the crying, or the memory of rape, or both. She blew her nose and continued. I went to a party last night. I was supposed to go home with my friend Brenda, but she left me because she was mad because I danced with a boy she likes. She wiped her eyes and blew her nose again. So I accepted the ride with 3 boys I know. I can't tell you anything else. Can't you give me their names? I'll put them away so they can't hurt you again. I can't tell you. Don't you understand? He'll kill me. Her look was so forlorn I quit pressing her. We sat in silence until I asked her to tell me where she was raped. If I knew where, there might still be evidence that could lead me to the perps. I don't know where we were. Was it on the school property? No. Where was the party? It was at Cindy's house. Cindy McAllister? Yes. When you left there, where did you go? At first we drove around. The boys were acting weird, and anyway, they supposed to be taking me home. I encouraged her to continue, but instead of speaking, Mandy leaned her head against me. I put my arms around her. I'm so sorry, Mandy. He kept saying, You won it, bitch. You made me do it. She spoke into my chest, her arms in a death grip around my waist. Afterward, he asked the other boys if they wanted some, like I was something to share. That's when the others realized how much trouble they were in, and they said no, they'd better get going. And the big one, he said he'd kill me. So, only one of the 3 raped you? She nodded. He forced the others to hold me down. I smoothed her hair back from her face, but couldn't think of one thing to say that would be of comfort after something like that. In the distance, a train whistle mourned as if it understood. The train came around a hill and was soon close enough to hear the clanking of the metal connections between the cars and the pounding wheels on the rails. I wish I could just hop on it, Mandy said above the noise, sounding as sorrowful as the whistle. Where would you go? I don't know. Anywhere but Trilingua. I knew to the heartbeat how that felt. It won't help to run away. How do you know? Because I tried it. When you get somewhere, you'll see that your problems came with you. She watched me with sad eyes. And the people who love and support you won't be there. She didn't seem convinced, but said, I guess I'd miss my family. Then she said in a sob, the boy who raped me said if I told anybody, he'd kill me and put my naked photos on the internet. They took photos? I couldn't believe something already so awful could get worse. One raped me. The others took turns holding and taking pictures of me. Can you describe where you were? No, I felt lost. Did they take you far? It seemed like it was. I remember one thing, though. Scary-looking old trucks and cars were there. You mean junkers? Yes, partly covered by plants and stuff. How many? I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. She pulled away enough to look into my face. I saw how white she was. What if I'm pregnant? I felt like I'd been body slammed by an elephant. Did he use a condom? I don't know. Will you let me take you to the hospital? They have a pill that they can give you. If they won't, I'll find a doctor who will. My mother, for one. Relief washed over her face, and the color returned. Okay, she said, I'd like to go. Chapter 7. Mandy lay on an exam table while we waited for a nurse to examine her. I held her hand and dialed Sheriff Ben with the other to tell him we were there. Did she talk to you? He asked. Some. I don't guess you can talk right now? No, sir. Her parents will demand to join you. I know, but can you talk them out of it? I'll bring her there when she's finished. They'll be furious with you. It's okay. It's the right thing, and Mandy wanted it. Please tell them that. Did she give you names? No, but I'll figure it out, Sheriff. If her parents insist on coming, I'll have to come too. I hoped Mandy would be examined before anyone could get in the way. As if in answer to that prayer, the nurse hustled towards us and announced she was ready. I've got to go, Sheriff Ben. They're going to do the exam. Good. I hope they can get something. I do too. The nurse, who was not Marcy, but was capable and kind, said there was tearing and trauma to the vagina. The perpetrator must have used a condom because there was no semen present. She made note of the many marks and bruises. I photocopied them for the record and promised my weeping Mandy that they would not be made public. When I mentioned using them in prosecution, she began to rally. I thought it wouldn't be long before she was ready to help us with our case. Mandy's parents arrived, but the sheriff had held him off as long as he could, and they missed the exam. Julie Robbins stormed into the room like an avenger just as her daughter was getting dressed. I felt sure she was going to hit me. Just what in the hell have you done? She demanded in a snarl. I told you we didn't want a scandal. Mandy wanted to come. Besides, it's protocol in a rape. That's when she slapped me. My instinct response was to slap her back. The second was to cry. I was hurt and insulted. It hurt and it was insulting and damaging my pride. I was able to keep from doing either thing. My hand went to my face instead of hers, and I stepped away. When the nurse opened the privacy curtain, Sheriff Ben was standing there. He had heard everything. I watched him taking in the scene. It's against the law to assault a police officer of the law. It's against the law to assault an officer of the law, he said in his serious lawman voice. There won't be a scandal if you'll calm down and be reasonable. Our sheriff has a manner that makes people pay attention. He's large enough to be intimidating, but he's soft-spoken, gallant, and good-looking for an old man. Still, he means business, and he's armed. Julie Robbins realized she had screwed up, but instead of apologizing to me, she apologized to the sheriff and then went to her daughter's side. That was fine. That is where she belonged. Mandy let herself be hugged and baby talked by her mom, and I was relieved to see it. I stood quietly by the sheriff. When he saw me looking at him, he nodded in approval. It made me feel like a superhero for a moment until Julie Robbins opened her mouth to shoot me down. I don't want you going after whoever did this, she hissed at me. I turned my back on her, which was as close as I could professionally get to a screw you. We're going to do our jobs, Mrs. Robbins, Sheriff Ben said. Rape is a violent crime that is not tolerated, and as long as I'm sheriff of Brewster County, it's a felony that we'll prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I haven't spoken with Deputy Ricos about the details yet, but I will tell you this. If you try to stand in her way, I'll prosecute you too. He paused and took a breath. And if you ever touch her again, you will be seeing the inside of my jail. Is that clear? Yes, sir. She hung her head. Attitude changed. Also, we'll need the clothing Mandy was wearing when she was raped. I'm going to send Deputy Ricos by to get it. I assume that won't be a problem. No, sir. The sheriff softened. Your job is to take this young lady home and love and care for her the way only you can. If I were you, I'd keep her out of school a day or two until Deputy Ricos has the culprits in custody. I stared at him in disbelief. He was putting a lot on me. Something in me stepped up then, and I knew I could do it. I wanted to swagger like John Wayne and declare that no son of a bitch was going to rape girls in Terlingua and get away with it while Deputy Ricos lived and breathed. But I held back. All the way home, I stressed about catching the rapists, except for when I was stressing about Jimmy Joe Blanks. He was angry that I wouldn't go for a drink with him and called me continuously on my cell phone until I lost service about 5 miles out of Alpine. After that, the satellite phone started. I didn't answer it and hoped it was him and not the sheriff or Barney. Either one of them would use the radio, but Jimmy Joe wouldn't dare. It was too public, and the sheriff's office policy was to have short, difficult to decipher conversations because nosy people with police scanners. The sheriff would hear him broadcast his weirdness and would kick his ass. When I thought about the sheriff coming down on Jimmy Joe with both boots, I began to hope he would go ahead and use it. When the call stopped, I thought about abandoned trucks and cars. There were shells of vehicles here and there, rusting in the desert. I could only think of one place in South Brewster County where there were 5 or 6 together. This was off South County Road, up a canyon at the base of a sandstone cliff. I wanted to go then, but sunset was spreading its impressive range of red colors across the humps and bumps, buttes and mountains in the south of the county as I got closer to home. Absolute darkness would follow. Barney radioed. Unit 5 to Unit 6. Call me. I was glad to hear his voice and called him on the satellite phone. How come you aren't answering your damn phone, Ricos? Jimmy Joe Blanks is why. Ah, Schutz is still pursuing you hot and heavy. Did you call to harass me? No, seems like it was about business, but you made me forget, thinking about Schutz. You could do worse than old Schutz. No, I couldn't. I can name 100 guys from down here that'd be worse. Most of them don't even work. At least Schutz is gainfully employed. Give it up, Barn, or I'm going to hang up. Okay. I wanted to tell you about my interviews. Aren't you working tomorrow? Yeah, why? Did you figure out the murder? Not yet. Then can't it wait? Mandy Robbins was raped last night. Oh, man. Interlingua or Alpine? Interlingua, by some boys in the high school. Oh, man, he repeated with sincere dismay. It's only mid-September. School hasn't been in session but a few weeks. Do you know who did it? I don't know yet. After that, I had to tell him everything, including my ideas about catching the perps. By the time we hung up, I was pulling into my mother's driveway. I entered the house through the back door, which she never locked, and left the bread on the counter. Even without lights, it was easy to move through the home I knew well. With my penlight, I found the matching earring on her dresser, just one gold hoop with a tiny heart in the center. I checked her jewelry box, all the bathroom surfaces, and her nightstands. Everywhere someone would leave an earring, but I only found the one. I left it where it was, feeling sick about looking through her things and sick about what my find meant. On the way out, I stopped in Mom's kitchen to peer outside. On the window shelf was a gold-plated belt buckle that Kevin won the day he died. It came with a $5,000 purse. I tried to bury it with him, but my mother had insisted I'd regret it. I should keep something that would have been important to him. Next, I tried leaving it on his headstone, but obviously she had retrieved it. I wondered what had happened to it and felt sure he hadn't come for it. If he would come back, he'd come for me, not a belt buckle. Kevin was addicted to the rodeo, danger, and an 8-second ride. At age 26, one small mistake ended his life. It seemed so unfair. Kevin had cheated death many times, but in a split second, he'd run out of aces. Sitting on my porch that night, watching my mountain in the dark, I got very drunk. When I ran out of tequila, I finished off Kevin's sipping whiskey. It wasn't like he'd ever sip it again. After that, I drank cold long necks. I was on a roll, and the more I thought I should stop, the more I drank. What finally did stop me was a fuzzy thought that I had serious butt kicking to do tomorrow, and doing it hungover would be hell. For a while I dozed in the rocking chair, but I woke up chilled, stumbled to the bed, and more or less fell in and passed out, still dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. I woke up with a pounding heart. There was someone in my house. The hall nightlight was off, and I had just replaced the bulb. It was dark, and I was alone, and incapacitated by booze. Boots in the hall. Had the rapists come for me? Would I be splayed naked, raped, and photographed? I was terrified. I couldn't have lifted my Beretta 9mm even if I'd remembered it was on the dresser. I swore to myself that if I got out of this alive, I would stop drinking. The cell phone crossed my mind. I could call Barney, but I didn't know where that was either, and thought I'd left it on the porch. "Who's there?" I asked in the dark. There was no answer, but the footsteps halted. Then, about the time I started breathing again, they began coming towards me.